Let's get started. So most AI assistants today run on the server. But web mapping applications are different. The map, the layers, the user interactions, all of that already lives in the browser. So we asked a simple question. What if the AI agents ran there too? Instead of sending all the context to the server, we brought the AI to where the context already lives, the browser. Today, I'm going to show you how we build these AI agents directly in the browser and how they interact with your map. My name is Dhrumil, and I'm the lead developer on this project. And joining me is Kristian, who is the lead product engineer on building these AI assistants. And yes, as part of the My Event app, please share feedback. So I'm going to go over why AI and web mapping is different. We'll look at a demo if that works. We had some problem with our LLM server, so I'm going to try and do a demo and see if it works. If not, we have a recording that I'll try and walk through. Then we'll look at the architecture and the orchestration. And then Kristian will go over the developer experience and the really cool part, how you guys can build your own custom agents. So most AI assistants today, the architecture is kind of something like this, where the user enters something into a web application, and then all of the thing is offloaded to a backend, where there's a server-side orchestration and agents are running there. You have your app logic, and then all of that connects to LLMs for different kinds of questions. The UI, it mainly acts as a client. So this is the typical architecture. AI reasoning runs on the server. But web mapping applications are different. They are already very rich on the client side. And that is especially true for the applications that are built with the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript. Things like the map state. For example, what is the extent? How many features are you looking at? All of that is already there in the browser. Things like layer data. So for example, if you're looking at 5 layers, 2 of them are visible, 2 are not visible, and the 5th one is based on some kind of scale range. All that information is there in the browser. Things like application logic or the business logic. So this is the part where as you are building your custom agents, you will find within your agents, you end up doing tool calling. And a lot of the tool calling will be to these functions and the application logic that runs in the ArcGIS Maps SDK. And then things like user interaction. So a simple example would be you clicked on a pop-up and it opened and it has some information. If you clicked on a pop-up, a lot of times it says 1 of 50. And all of that, the browser already knows about everything that is on the map. So the question we asked is, all these things already live in the browser, why move everything to the server to run AI? So instead, run the agents directly in the browser, and it really keeps from a developer, especially for us web developers, things really simple. We can just run these things in the browser. And the result is we get these AI assistants that integrate naturally with web mapping applications. So again, to summarize, what is an agentic web mapping application? So the typical workflow is you start in the map viewer, for example, and you create a web map. And it is, because of that, it's web map centric. And at this release, we are shipping these AI components, where the primary UI is the natural language user interface. And yeah, as I said, the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript, at this release, it provides web components for building custom agentic web mapping applications. So now let's try and look at the demo. And Kristian was going to show this at the plenary, but we had some outages with our LLM servers, but let's see if it works. So in this example, I have, in the map viewer, created a really simple web map with a single layer. Oh. Oh yeah, maybe that is it. Okay, there you go. So yeah, we have a simple nursing homes example of nursing homes all over the United States. And if I look at the table, it has about 14,600 records. And this layer is actually coming from the Living Atlas. And yeah, so before we look at the demo, there are a few steps that need to happen to get into this state, and Kristian will go over that. And let me sign in to, so this is running in CodePens, but let me go ahead and sign in. All right. Okay, so again, this is the same web map that we authored in the map viewer. And let's start with a simple question: zoom to Palm Springs Convention Center in California, and let's see if this works. Oh wow, okay, it worked this time. So it was just not working like a couple of hours ago. So yeah. So yeah, in this case, like I'll go over the code, but there are 3 agents that are registered. One of them is the navigation agent. And when I ask this question, so if I open the logs, these are my available agents right now. Let me try and zoom in. Oops. So these are my available agents: the data exploration, help, and navigation. So when we ask this question, out of the 3, we have an orchestrator agent, which picks which agent this likely belongs to. And in this case, it would be the navigation agent. And then within our navigation agent, we have several tools. And one of the tool is geocoding tool. And that is what executes, and we see this result on the map. And let me zoom out a little bit so we can see a few of these points. And my next question can be: count the number of nursing homes in my extent. So as I'm running this, one of the things I mentioned earlier, like the browser already has the context. And for this particular example, it's going to the data exploration agent, and let's actually count. It came back as 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So yeah, like the result came back, and I mean, in this case, they are just 9 nursing homes, but if there are a lot, yeah. So again, like going back to the log, it went to the data exploration agent, and one of the key pieces here is when it's generating the query, it uses the use current extent as true, and based on that, it knows like this is the extent it needs to query. Let's go to another example, and in this case, we can ask show nursing homes in Texas. So in this example, it also needs to figure out which field I'm asking about. So in this example, there are about 20 fields, and one of them is the state field. But for the LLM to figure out, we are running embeddings, and even the embeddings in this case are running in the browser itself. So it came back with 117 nursing homes that were returned, like nursing homes in Texas. So again, if I go back at the logs, it came back as the data exploration agent. And one of the key pieces here is it did vector search. And this vector search really narrows down your layers and your fields. In this case, we just have one layer, but you can imagine if there are several layers, you don't want to send all the information about the several layers and the several fields all to the LLM, or you would just run out of tokens pretty quickly. So in this case, it came back with the nursing homes as a 0.80 or 80% chance of that. And then if you look at all the fields in here, there are about like 20 fields. And these are all the fields that the vector search came back saying these are the top 10. And all this information we provided as context to the LLM, which after that figured out like this is the where clause that the user is asking about. And yes, in this case, we are not asking about the current extent as we were in the previous example. So this is one part, but as now I can try like a follow-up question. Compare these to the nursing homes in California. So if I go ahead and ask this, so now in this particular state, the first question was show the nursing homes in Texas, and it came back with a particular number. Now we are asking compare them to the nursing homes in California. So this is a follow-up as part of your conversation. And again, this thing again goes back to the data exploration agent. And if I zoom in a little bit here, it says the Texas has 1177 nursing homes, and California has 1159. So Texas apparently has 18 nursing homes more than we do in California. So this was an example, and if we look at the code, so I'll go to the code here and quickly. So this is the web map ID. This is the same web map ID that I have here that I have pasted. And then we have obviously loaded the JavaScript SDK. And this is the main bit where we are loading the ArcGIS assistant. And then within the assistant, we are registering 3 agents: the navigation agent, the data exploration agent. Those 2 we saw example. And then we have another agent, which is called the help agent, to which you can ask questions like, what can I do with this map? What are all the fields that are available? So, but yeah, the really cool part is this thing is running in CodePen, so there's no backend required. So going back to the presentation. Oops. So yeah, now let's look at the system architecture for this. So you have the assistant or the UI where you ask the question, and then it goes to the orchestrator. This is the supervisor, and this orchestrator or the supervisor agent, based on the question, it looks at all the agents that are available to it. In the example we saw, we had the navigation agent, which had a bunch of navigation tools. We saw the geocoding tool, for example. Then we saw 2-3 examples for the data exploration agent. And within that data exploration agent, there are query and filter tools. Then we had the help agent, which has some of the help tools. And then this is the really cool bit. Like, as part of this architecture, you can also build your custom agents and then register them with the orchestrator. And you can have your own tools that are running side by side with these out-of-box agents. You can mix and match. You can use some. You don't have to use all the out-of-box agents. You can use some of them, and you can have more of your own custom agents. So this is the typical architecture. You ask the question, orchestrator decides which of the agents it needs to call. Then it goes to the agent. The agent, via various tools, it can do something. It can make some updates to the map, for example. And at the end of it, it needs to give an output message back to the orchestrator, so the orchestrator knows what this agent did, which helps with the follow-up conversation, like we saw with the example comparing Texas and California. So if we look at the request flow for one of the questions, which was show nursing homes in Texas. So again, it was the same. We have the UI where we ask this question. It goes to the orchestrator, and these are all the red lines. So it goes to the orchestrator decides it needs to call the data exploration agent, and then within that agent, it calls a bunch of tools. The first one was the query tool, where it figured out what's the where clause, and then the second part was the filter, based on which it changed things on the map. And then it generated an output, and it sent it back to the orchestrator, which at that time could have decided maybe this is the only one, or it needs to call some other agent. And if we look at this in a little more detail, so you have the orchestrator, and then before, as I mentioned earlier, we can't send all the layers and all the fields to the LLM. So for that, it first needs to identify the relevant layers, the relevant fields, and then it goes in and does tool calling, for example, and then it updates the map and gives the response back to the assistant. So this was really the key piece for us to get this all working in the browser, was understanding the map schema with embeddings. And there is a full setup step that Kristian will go over, how you set up embeddings. But once the embeddings and everything is set up, and you go and you ask the question, one of the things that we've done is we've taken all the embeddings and loaded them in the browser's worker. And then when the question is asked, it goes inside the browser worker and it tries to figure out the relevant layers and the relevant fields. And because this thing is working in the worker, it does not affect the main thread, especially if there are several hundred fields, for example. And yes, to summarize, like why run AI in the browser? The main piece is the map already runs in the browser. It has all kinds of application state, map context. Everything is already there. So it's just a matter of writing all these agents that work in the browser in a certain way. And the agents can directly interact with the map. But I think the biggest piece for us web developers is there's no custom backend required. So we can write this as any other web application, deploy it. As we saw, like one example was with CodePen, and that's the CDN version. And then Kristian will look at an NPM version for this. And that's, I'll hand it over to Kristian, and he'll go over the developer experience and the really cool part, how you guys can write your own custom agents.
Thanks, Dhrumil. Don't sell yourself short. Your stuff was cool. Like, it's not like mine is the only cool part. Also, I'm happy to see it working. I mean, I'm so disappointed I couldn't get up there and show you guys earlier, but yeah, that's awesome. This has been a fun project. So the developer experience we've gone through all kinds of, let's switch over to 3. Thanks. Yeah, we've gone through all kinds of, loops of discussions trying to figure out what will make sense for you as the developer when it comes to building these kinds of applications and how can we best help you. So hopefully this vision we have resonates. And if it doesn't, or there's a hiccup, we strongly encourage your feedback because you're going to help shape the future of this. And so we are in beta, and we are collecting your feedback in a number of ways, and I'll go over that towards the end. So where can you find information about this today? So you're going to get a lot of information. You'll see a bunch of slides. You will have access to the slides in the proceedings, but pretty much everything you see here is documented. So I just want to point out, on our references page, we do have this AI components package now documented. So there's a couple of places I'm going to show you, and but first we'll kind of dive into what you get as a developer from this package. This green box off to the left talks about the components that we actually deliver. First off, we give you the ArcGIS Assistant component. Think of this as the main thing you're going to work with at first. It gives the user interface. It's a chat-based natural language interface. We set it up all for you, and you have a number of properties available for configuring your experience for the end user. Everything else, this is a little new actually to the JavaScript SDK, this concept, and this is where we would like to hear feedback as well. These are unrendered components. So even though you're adding these as HTML markup to your applications, you're not going to see anything render as a result. Rather, it is you registering capabilities to that assistant component. And as Dhrumil pointed out, we have 3 that we ship out of the box today. Navigation, which handles everything map navigation, not 3D scenes quite yet, but 2D maps. Data exploration, this is our attempt at being able to query the layers in your web map using natural language. And then a help agent. So in testing, people frequently ask questions to start with, like, what am I looking at? Or what is available in this web map? What kinds of questions can I ask? That's the agent that helps answer those questions. We also have a more generic component called ArcGIS Assistant Agent. I don't love the name, but it's just kind of following the same pattern as the rest of them. This is where you would use this for adding your own custom agent to your application. And along with that, we ship utility methods. So you can make LLM calls where we provide the models that you can interact with, and among other things. This purple box kind of gives you an example or an idea of the developer options. So you can set things like example prompts. You can show or hide those logs. So Dhrumil showed you an example of expanding that log in the interface. A lot of end users aren't going to want that or use it or need it. So as a developer, you can use it for debugging purposes. Or your users may actually want that for transparency purposes to see what's going on. You can also collect your own feedback. So we give you a little component or action that allows the user to say that they had a good experience or a bad experience, and we give you an event so you can actually capture their feedback, log it to whatever database or service you want for your own purposes. So that's not for us to track feedback, it's for you to track your users' feedback. As well as options for human in the loop. That's important. We'll show an example in just a minute of that. AI can be, because it's non-deterministic in nature, that means it could perform, if you're not careful, it could perform destructive actions to your data, and you definitely want to avoid that. So we give you options for interrupting the workflow, saying, are you sure you want to complete this edit? Are you sure you want to delete all the features in this layer? Yes, proceed. Okay, that's on the user at that point to make that call. So we give you options for stopping the workflow, as well as sending messages to the log and to the chat. All right. I won't cover this slide in too much depth because Dhrumil already showed this off, but really this is about getting you started efficiently. You don't have to worry about the orchestration piece. You don't have to worry about handling the LLM calls. It's all handled within the browser, and that means that you can actually leverage anything in the JavaScript SDK at your disposal when you create a custom agent. So that's pretty powerful. And of course, you can leverage the built-in agents, and we plan to continue to release more. So you don't have to build your own if there's obvious workflows that multiple users or customers need. We can provide those in the future. And of course, you have the ability to integrate with client-side agents. Okay, so Dhrumil already talked about the CDN. This is also new at 5.0 of the JavaScript SDK, is this universal import. AI components come as part of that import, so you don't have to add another script tag. You will get these out of the box there if you use the CDN. You can also use NPM or another package manager to build custom agents with whatever framework of choice. The Node or NPM route is the only way you can create custom agents. So there's no path for creating a custom agent today through the CDN. So if that's what you need to do, that's the workflow you need to go down. And of course, it's compatible with whatever framework of choice you prefer to use. Okay, I can't stress enough how important the setup stage of this is. It's not just about the code and adding the components. It's really about the whole process of setting everything up. So you have to be very deliberate with what you want the end user to have access to, what kind of experience you want them to have. So whether you, as a developer, you're the one setting up the web map, or you have a GIS specialist setting up the web map, you need to be very deliberate with and intentional with what's included in that web map and how those layers are configured. So let's talk through what's important here. So number one, as you saw in Dhrumil's demo, the primary context provided to the components, or to rather the agents within this component, is the web map. When you create a custom agent, you don't have to have a web map as part of the context, but you certainly could. You can put whatever context you want there. With our out-of-the-box agents, it's the web map. So as I stated, they must be prepared for success. And here's some basic guidelines. And some of these cross over with just general web development when it comes to web maps. Simpler is better. If you're gonna have 50 layers in your web map, you're probably not gonna be quite as, or your user, I should say, is not gonna be quite as successful with the assistant as if there are 3 layers. So if you can get away with fewer, go with the fewer number of layers and the fewer number of fields. Layers, they should have good and complete item information. Actually, that slide should say they must have that. Okay, full stop. If you do not have that information, it's going to be less accurate, you know. So we'll give you some tips on what you can do there to save time. But here's the top 3 I would say. Your layer titles within your map should reflect the purpose of the layer. So some layers, and even Living Atlas layers, if you find they have great metadata, great setup, but there's a lot in there. And so if you bring in a layer of census tracts and you filter it down to just California, it would be good to say California census tracts, because the agents will honor that web map filter on the layer. So do describe what the purpose of the layer is. Layer field aliases and descriptions should also be accurate and be present. If you have crop data, indicate what the units of measurement are in the description. That will help, because a user might ask for another unit. Let's say I want to show bushels of wheat, but they're asking for some other unit that you could convert from bushels to that unit. The LLM does have the capability to do those conversions. And so telling the LLM what those units are will be critical. Setting layer filters is helpful as well. I just kind of pointed that out with the earlier example. Web maps must have vector embeddings generated and persisted in the map resource. I'm going to show you where that happens. Without that, you're going to get an error. You load a web map in this application, you add the assistants like Dhrumil showed, but your web map doesn't have embeddings. It will display an error, but we also provide a link to you in the UI to take you to learning how to generate those embeddings. So if you forget what I show you here, just try a web map and you'll get that link and it will take you right there for helping. And then just generally good cartographic practices. All right, so let's say you have a lot of layers and you hate writing metadata. I mean, who actually likes writing metadata? I don't really know very many people who do, but apologies, I don't mean to offend anyone if you actually do. So there is the item details assistant. This is currently in beta. You can, I'm not gonna demo this right now, but you can certainly find us in the showcase and we can walk you through it there. And I think there's other sessions that show this and talk about it. But you can go into your item details for your layer and then select fields and you'll get this suggest button pop up. You just click that and you get this nice UI. It will generate aliases, descriptions, value types for your fields. And then you can just be a reviewer of that information and say, oh, I want to add a little more information, or the LLM got this suggestion wrong, I'm going to update it, or it did pretty well and I'm just going to save that. So huge time saver. Highly recommend that. Okay, vector embeddings. All right, so what is an embedding? Embeddings represent the semantic meaning of terms and sentences as multi-dimensional vectors. So what we do is we generate embeddings for layer titles and as well as the field names, aliases, and descriptions. So all of those strings, so to speak, exist in a vector space. So we create vectors for those. That's what's persisted on the web map. Once a user enters a question, like what Dhrumil was just showing, that string that they enter, we convert to a vector client side. And that is used to do a search against all of those layers and all of those fields, and they're scored. And you can transparently see how it's scored in the log. So if you're debugging, why is this not getting my question right? You can kind of tell, oh, it's not, I'm not indicating to the assistant or to the agent which field I should use. So sometimes you need to be more explicit. But again, if you set up that web map early for success, it's going to do pretty well in this space. So it'll do a search, it'll find the right, find the right target layer, fields. So it could build out SQL where clauses for filtering. It can build out, it could find layers for querying, other data or statistics. That's really important. And then, what, like Dhrumil pointed out, this actually allows us to send less context to the LLM. There are token limits, and even if you push those boundaries and we send, let's say, all the web map information, the LLM, almost like a human in a sense, when you get too much information, you're going to get overwhelmed and you might get a little confused and start making choices that aren't exactly correct. LLMs are kind of no different in this space. So the less, more targeted, intentional information we send it, the better it's going to be. Okay, so during the beta phase, we have a button available on the web map settings page. So it's just under the section called Manage AI Vector Embeddings. What this will do is it'll just generate the embeddings. Now, I do put a couple of bullet points here for transparency. If you don't provide a field description, we will take the liberty of generating that for you using the LLM. You just don't see what it is. There's no reviewing. So it's really important that you actually are intentional about that, because there's no ability to tell the to say, oh, that's incorrect. We do that in order to generate the embedding. So I would say it's not the ideal experience. Ideally, if you opt into AI assistants in your organization and your items, you want them to be AI enabled, you don't have to go in and click this button and regenerate embeddings, because any update you make to the web map as far as layers are concerned or the fields, you have to regenerate the embeddings to represent it accurately. Not ideal to have to make changes and then go back and click regenerate. So in the future, we look to improve that process. Okay, before I get into agents, I just want to show you really quick that experience. Oop. So this is a web map I have just in my organization. Main page, sorry, bad example. I'm not showing a lot of information here. You click settings, and then you scroll all the way to the bottom in this web map section, and then you'll see that. If there are no embeddings, it will say generate embeddings. If you already have them, you can click regenerate to update them. All right. I'll kind of breeze through these slides since Dhrumil showed good examples of them. Like I said, the map is the main source of context for agents. So you can set that either on the agent itself or on the assistant level. So you just set reference element and you point to the ID of that web map. Not the item ID, but the ID of the ArcGIS map component that you have in your application. This is true of all of the agents I'm going to show you. The purpose of this is just for navigation. You have to have the web map, but this thing can do, it's important to know what it's capable of today. Geocoding, going to web map bookmarks, layer extent, or a feature or set of features. Or if you just say zoom in or go to this scale, it will zoom into that scale. So we do have tools for that. Something it is not aware of is like your actual location. So if you say, tell me how to get from my location to this area, it's not going to have the context of your location. So there's certain context things that we do document that it doesn't have access to. Data exploration, this is for query. So there's a wide space here. And this is something we're going to continue to expand because there's really kind of no end to how you can query your data or what kinds of questions you can ask. There's going to be obvious limits to this in the early goings. But if you want to get something like a feature attribute, what is the population value for New York? If New York has a city point in your layer, it will be able to find that feature and give you the value. Getting statistics on the layer. Query features. So you might say, how many states have more than 500 nursing homes? It would be able to tell you that number. or even point and polygon queries. So you could say, how many cities are within this county? If you have a counties layer, it should be able to answer that question well. And it also does a feature filter. So you can visually see what in the map, an answer to a query. Help agent, I'm not going to focus on this. That's just asking about the web map. All right, let's get into custom agents. I think before we show the code and the demo, it's important to know what's important for an agent when you create it. An agent requires a few things. One, a system prompt, or a series of prompts really, because as you'll see in the code, there's multiple nodes in a graph, and each one may have a prompt that goes along with it, as well as the tools. So if you have a tool calling agent, you can write JavaScript functions, and you can leverage the JavaScript SDK for that. And then you register those tools to an agent, and those have descriptions. So part of it is coding in JavaScript or TypeScript. The other half of it is writing English to describe those things so the LLM will know, oh, I need to call this tool, or I need to know which parameters to extract. Also context. So we provide the web, or we require the web map, but you may have documents in your organization that you want the LLM to be aware of it to scan. You may have some other service that's not in ArcGIS that you can provide it as context. So the idea is the agent is defined in the browser, that dashed line. Think of that as the browser context. So you define your prompts there, your tools, everything is in the browser. User inputs their question, and then there's a call to an LLM. The LLM call is a server call elsewhere, and then it finds out what to do, and then it gives you some kind of output. Here's the requirements today. So we built this on top of LangChain and LangGraph. These are browser implementations. So you need to be aware of these packages, and we do link to their documentation to help you out. And then as I stated before, you must be building this with modern tooling like a framework. All right, let's just hop over to the browser, see how much time I got here. Just got a few minutes. First off, I want to point out in the documentation, this is the homepage for the JavaScript SDK. If you scroll down on the left-hand TOC, there's this chapter called Agentic Mapping Applications. Bookmark this, it will be your friend. It gets into everything we talked about today. You don't need the slides. You can just read through this and you can see, hey, that's the same graph I saw in that session. And then descriptions and links to everything. Orchestration, that's what Dhrumil talked about. Cool. And then it even shows you some examples with best practices. We talk about the web map setup. So everything that you saw here, oh, that looks like that one slide I saw. It's all documented here. We even have this page on custom agents, how to get started with the links to these different libraries, as well as frequently asked questions like, is this supported in enterprise yet? No, not yet. We're working on that. But it gets into other things like, does this cost me anything? No, not yet, not during beta. So we're still trying to figure that one out too. But if you go to the references, AI components here, and this will get into the assistant component, so you can see all that documentation, which gets into it, a demo app, and the main properties and methods. So if you don't want to show that log, you can leave it disabled. It's disabled by default. When it comes to the agents, anything that ends with the word agent is an agent. So this is the custom agent component that you would use to create a custom agent. And then here's data exploration, help, navigation, and we try to get into, here's the capabilities, here are questions you could ask, or here are the questions that users might expect to ask, but they can't because of limitations. So it should all be in there. And if it's not, let us know and we can update the information. All right, so let's look at a custom agent. So one of the requirements for using this component is you do need to have an ArcGIS Online organizational account and you have to sign in. That's for security purposes. We're trying to still figure out the API keys and tokens and all that kind of stuff. But today, if you refresh this page here, it's going to always prompt you for a sign-in, even though the web map might be public. In this case, the web map's public. So I can see the data. I need to sign in so I get access to that orchestration tier. Okay? Something I want to point out in the doc on that custom agents page, so let me navigate back to that guide. At the very bottom, there is these custom agent examples. I'm going to show you this one right here, the second one. If you click on these links, it will take you to our JS API resources repo. All of the code for these is available there. You can download it, install the modules, and get going really quickly. So that's what I've done here. And just to give you an idea of, actually, let me look over to the code first, because I think that will be better. So I create a web map, and I load it by portal item. This web map does have embeddings already, and this does come with the code. So when you download the code, you will see this web map in there. Just replace it with your own. This is a React app. So let me just look at the dependencies. We bring in ArcGIS AI components, and notice the version number, so that will pick up any patch for 5.0. The core SDK, map components, and calcite components. So calcite for the layout, map components to get access to the web map, and core for specific capabilities I want, and then AI components. And then I have React, all right? So in my main app component, I'm returning well, actually I have the map all the way down here. Sorry about that. So here's the map, and I'm referencing that web map that I created with the reference to the ID, and here's just the subcomponents I have with that map. But if I scroll back up here, within the calcite panel, I have this ArcGIS Assistant component. This reference element is required. You need to set that to point to your web map. Technically, you could set this on individual agents, but it's just, nicer to just set it in one place. And then all of this information, heading, description, entry message, these are to help your user out. So fully use those properties, because there's going to be confusion. They may not know exactly what they can ask, but you should fill this out to really help them along. Suggested prompts are also important in that regard. And then here you see the subcomponents, so navigation agent, data exploration, and this custom agent. So I created this, or Dhrumil actually created this, and I modified it a little bit. So service maintenance agent, what you do is you bring in this component, but then you have to set the context. In this case, it does rely on a map. And I'm going to go to this definition. This is a single file agent. You can make these agents as complicated or as simple as you possibly can, but this relies on LangGraph. So you'll see imports from LangGraph for building a graph to navigate this agent, as well as some of the other utilities that we provide for calling an LLM. So there's a few types up here that are defined, but the main idea is you have an incident prompt here. So basically, this is what the instruction the LLM gets. You're an assistant that logs road maintenance issues for a city public works department. And so you give it explicit directions, like these are the fields I want you to fill out. Here are the values. I did set up domains as well, so it will play nicely with those domains. And then you have a series of nodes. Let me skip down to the bottom so you can kind of see the structure of the graph. Right there. So here's the graph. So here's a few nodes. Extract maintenance, approval of maintenance, persist. Because this is a potentially destructive action, I'm editing data. I have a node that interrupts and says, do you want to continue with what I'm suggesting? That's what that node is, and I'll show you that in a minute here. That's a description of the agent. So you set the description on the agent registration object, you set the graph, you give it a name and an ID, set your state variables, and then this is the object that you actually set back to your agent property over here. But let's take a look at that node, like these nodes here. So up here, these trace messages are what shows in the log when the user is navigating through the graph. And we use Zod to set up schemas. So here's the schema of an incident that I want to record. And then this is the function for calling the LLM. We have two options for the models here. There's default and advanced. So default is the 5 mini model, GPT-5 mini, and then advanced would be 5.2. That's what we were having issues with earlier. There's the prompt and then schema. So this is basically allowing the LLM to return this in a structured way back to the client. Okay. So we basically get the information back from the LLM, create the ticket, return it to the next node, and it continues. So now we're looking at a human in the loop response or a scenario. So you set up a confirmation message. So the agent will say, I've prepared this, and the ticket includes all of the information the LLM came up with. And then you set that in a UI interrupt node. And you just need to make sure that you have these properties set up. But you would be able to say, well, these are the options I want the user to select from. There's a number of things like single selection, multiple selection, free text. If you want them to write in free text, you can do that. And then it continues. And if there's a yes response, then it's like, yes, I want to apply this edit. And that happens in the next node. So you can see we're creating a feature at this point. And then we're going to apply the edits with those features. So let's take a look at that example. So let's just pick kind of a random street corner. Yeah, if you don't mind holding that. So let's say, go to the corner of Camino Real and South Riverside Drive, Palm Springs. So nothing custom here. This is just the navigation agent at work. You'll see that show up in the log here. So navigation agent is being invoked and it geocodes. Great, that's where I'm at, or this is the corner I want to deal with. But now I might say there's a pile of palm fronds in the road or blocking the road. From a recent storm. Okay, so I have not said anything about a service ticket or maintenance. I'm just talking about blockage in a road. But the assistant looks at the descriptions that I'm providing to the LLM and it says, oh, this is probably this agent that is provided to me. And it prepares this report. So it might say, okay, the category is debris. So this is one of those domain categories that was set up. Here's the notes. Sometimes, because it's an LLM, it takes some liberties in what it puts here. So you could say like large pile of palm fronds on the roadway in the corner. So I did indicate that, fully blocking vehicular travel and posing a hazard to drivers and pedestrians. So, it's kind of cool, might be kind of frustrating depending on what you're going for. And then it says severity critical. That might not be critical. But if, the road were blowing up or something, then sure. But I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I want to proceed with that. Sure, let's make that a critical request. It posts that message. This is what you entered or agreed to, and then it applies that edit. So now you see it in the map. So that's just a quick example of a custom agent, one page. It's all on that GitHub repo. And so you can modify that to whatever workflow you have. There's also tool calling. I don't have a ton of time, but I do want to point out, so if I there's a more complicated example there. Yeah, thanks. I created this location services agent. If you want to see this one in all its glory, for what it's worth, I will be demoing this at the end of the week on Friday in the closing session. That's, demo I was going to show earlier in the plenary. So if you want to see all the steps here, or you can find me in the showcase, I'm going to step you through it. But there's there's a module or a file here that shows the graph that you would have just seen, as well as the tools. So routing and service area are two tools that it could call. So this is a tool calling example. So for example, I could say, well, I don't have a ton of time here, so let me just switch back to the slides if I can find them. There we go. Couple last things. Who can use these? So there are a number of things that you have to have enabled in your organization. Your end user has to be a named user logged into ArcGIS Online, an organizational account that does not include trial accounts. You must have AI assistance enabled. So some of these states are kind of confusing. So this one right here, you have to have toggled on. Allow use of AI assistance by members of your org. And then you must allow beta features. So this is like an off state. So you don't want to block Esri apps with beta features. And then they must have the AI assistance role privilege as well. So that needs to be toggled on. No cost is incurred to you during the beta period. So we pick up that cost for the service, but there will be a pricing structure made available publicly when we're ready for general availability. No timeline yet on when general availability is coming. We're still needing to evaluate feedback. Okay, so I won't go too deep in the road ahead since there is a road ahead session later in the week. But what you see in the 5.0 column is what we just went over. In 5.1, you can look to us or look forward to potentially more agents. Our knowledge graph team is already working on one. The ability to handle more agents. So today you only have 3 or 4 if you create a custom agent, but we're trying to think about how, how to improve the experience if there's a lot of agents. Of course, we're going to try to make this as fast and accurate as possible. So look to us to try to improve the data exploration experience. So the demo I ran out of time to show. I will show in this session, in the road ahead session, as well as the closing session. I really want to recommend this one if you're interested in AI assistants and agents. That's Friday at 10 a.m. Okay. And with that, I want to remind you to share your feedback in the app. Let Dhrumil and I know how we did and what kind of content you want covered. But I want to make sure that we cover questions. I'm sure that there are some questions in the group. So go ahead.
Is there indication on the web map class or the web map JSON if embeddings have been generated?
Okay, the question is there an indication on the web map class if it has embeddings generated? The answer is no, but that's good feedback. We should indicate that. So, yes. So if
redlining where we did our own graphics layer on top of it.
Oh, right. So yeah, the question is, let's say you have your web map persisted, and then you load that into the app and you add additional layers to it. Is it aware of those additional layers? No, it's not going to be aware of those today. But that's, again, also good feedback to have. Your custom tool could definitely know about that. Actually, the example I'm going to show on Friday at the closing session, it does do that. It uses a different layer that doesn't have to be part of the web map. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So the question is there a size limitation for the layers? I would say we don't document one, but yes, right? I mean, you're going to run into problems with embeddings. There's going to be a limit to what the embeddings model can generate, but we don't necessarily document what that limit is.
Yeah, I think the max we've tried is like 30, 40 layers. So yeah, it did work with that, but yeah, there will be some limitations. I mean that the number of features would depend on how much the JavaScript SDK itself can handle. So yeah, that is kind of more on the SDK side versus on the LLM or the AI side.
Okay, let's grab these questions and then you in the front. Go ahead.
Where are the embeddings stored? You said, are they a resource on the item itself?
They're an item resource. They're not in the JSON. Correct.
Do you plan to support custom models?
Do we plan to support custom models?
By yeah, like currently we just have these few models. But by custom models, do you mean models that you bring in, or? So currently, like if you write your own custom agent, you can point it to whichever model you want. So it would work in that sense.
Yeah.
Does whenever you enter a prompt, does it use the features that have been cached on the client side, or does it reach out to the ArcGIS server?
Oh, good question. So when you ask a question, like a data exploration question, does it use the features cached on the client or the server? So we try to be smart about that. And if it's available on the client, we will query the client. If it's not available, we're going to query the server to get an accurate response. Yes.
When editing, does it take into account the user's editing permission roles?
Okay, in editing, does it take into account the user's permission roles? So that would be a custom agent workflow. So you would need to handle that. We don't have, so the editing example I showed is all my own custom agent. So it's, yes, it would, I mean, if you're signed in, okay, so you do have to be signed in order to use this. So whatever privilege role you have for editing would apply there based on who the signed in user is, yes. Over here and then here.
Once the embeddings are generated on the back end, are they being searched on the front end, or are they still from the back end?
Are the embeddings being searched on the front or the back end?
Yeah, so they are actually stored on the item details page on the resources. So they are stored there, but then when you load the web application and the AI components, we download it onto the browser.
Okay, so there's a data flow to bring all the embeddings down to the browser.
Yes.
Correct. I saw a hand over on this. Oh, yes. Oh.
One question is related to the request. So it's possible to link external services like Azure Foundry or GCP services to link models or something.
I don't think I quite heard the
Yeah.
question. Can you?
Regarding the custom agents behavior, is it possible to link external services such as Azure Foundry or other models, for example, for GCP platform?
Okay. Yes. So if you have external services or models you want to connect to, can you do that in the custom agent workflow? Yes. You also need to handle the authentication for that. So like we handle authentication through ArcGIS Online, but if it's a custom thing, then yes, you can do that. But there was another, yes. We did not create our own model. We are using two models for the LLM GPT-5 Mini for some of the simple, like easy questions, and then GPT-5.2 is the other model.
Yes, and for embeddings, we are using the ADA 002 model.
Just a follow-up on the custom agents. So for the ones that you guys created, right, the navigation and the data orchestrator, can we change that to something that reads up close? So instead of using your GPT-5, can we use our own custom model?
So the question is, within the out-of-box agents, can we change so that instead of using those, yeah, currently there is no way to do that. Even at the orchestrator layer, it comes with the model that we ship, and that's the one it calls. But yeah, that is something we could consider.
That would have helped us this morning. You
Yes,
could have
if you could
switched the
change.
model. Go.
What's the life cycle of those models? So obviously
on, so will you be, how will you update it and notify people that we're updating?
That's an excellent question. When models get updated all the time, how do we communicate that? We're still trying to work that out, like what that process looks like. Because obviously, if a model gets retired or removed, in between JavaScript SDK releases, your app's going to break, right? So there's got to be a story we figure out for this.
Yes, but the models that we are releasing that are working right now, the 5.2 mini and the embeddings model, they're not going to retire till the end of next year. So we do have some time. So maybe by the time we get there, we go to 5.3.6 or whatever other models are.
Cool. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for coming out. Great questions, and feel free to find us for more.